I know, I'm late, but that's what happens when you have a job and don't have a computer for most of December. God damn it, frogs! I could have been a prophet! I told you to stop playing low! Okay, done. Let's begin.
Let me guess. The humans made you, abandoned you, and didn't tell you why? Even though you're incredibly handsome, entertaining, funny, and have a wonderful tailcoat? Great. Pass me the coloring book.
Oh, hello, dear viewer. Please take a seat. Have you ever heard the tragedy of the perfect machine? Obviously, I'm not talking about a truly perfect being, but for its fill it was. A unique video game that would revolutionize the future of entertainment. It didn't belong to just one genre. It could be whatever the player wanted it, thanks to a charismatic and theatrical creature designed to make you happy. Any dream you had, it will come true. Designed to entertain tens of thousands. All it wanted was a thank you for its work. But one day, it was doomed to be trapped with a single audience, one it wasn't prepared to handle. It did what it could, but as the years passed, it didn't get what it wanted from them. And the animosity between them grew as it couldn't satisfy them. Until one day, it broke him, and what was a paradise became a nightmare. The irony, it wasn't hatred or resentment, but in trying to please them, his audience drove him to insanity because he couldn't understand them. The perfect machine was so perfect that it couldn't satisfy such imperfect beings.
E se comer chocolate vai morrer!
Okay, the truth is that the video I originally released left me unsatisfied because I rushed it since I wouldn't have access to my PC for a while, and the editor took its sweet time. So, I decided to make this new and improved video to compensate for not having made a proper video. I want to take the time to evaluate all the information we currently have about the characters in the digital circus to assess where we stand for the end, what we have, and everything this episode gave us. So, this video will be a mix of theories and analysis of the last episode, and we'll see where we are now and, to a lesser extent, what the future may hold. Okay, let's start with these three since they're the only ones whose story arcs have concluded, so they don't have much left to do in the future, except for someone we'll talk about later. Subul seems to be having less trouble with his body after what happened in the previous episode. After shooting Jax, she seems to be more comfortable with it. You know, kids, the cure for body dysmorphia is first-degree murder. Putting aside the fact that the apparent cure for body dysmorphia is shooting Jax, it's not that Subul is happy with his new body. I'd say it's more that his focus has simply shifted from what could have been to what it is. I know the example I'm about to give isn't the best because it's poorly executed and feels rushed, but Dowsin Rowe from infamous Second Son goes through something similar. When he discovers he's become a conductor, he's initially scared and unhappy about it.
I can't stop it, man. I can't stop it. Reggie, I can't stop it, man.
It's okay. You're okay. Just breathe. Breathe. You're alright. You're alright.
I'm one of them, man. I'm one of them.
No!
Until he takes a moment to think about all the amazing things he can now do with his newfound powers.
And of course, the only downside being that, nope. Can't think of anything. This is pretty freaking awesome.
It's actually a quite realistic message. Sometimes you have to look at things from a different angle to be happy, or at least make your life less unbearable. We focus so much on what we don't have that we don't appreciate what we do have. Things won't always be the way we wanted them to be, and we have to accept that. But we can make small changes in our lives to make them more bearable and find happiness within our limitations. Hey, isn't that the message of Wreck-It Ralph? Shh, but they don't know it! On the other hand, we have our protagonist, about whom I don't really have much to say. I think that one problem the series had is that Pomni takes a backseat to more interesting characters, like Will and Elizabeth in Pirates of the Caribbean. Not because Pomni is a bad character, but because her story arc happened at the beginning of the series. This allows her to help others when she's more at ease and her conflict is more or less resolved. But that means others take her place, which isn't necessarily bad, but it does mean I don't have much to say about her now. Now, Gangle, on the other hand, is the one I'm worried about. I'm not an expert on psychology, but I say she has depression and is bipolar. However, she's shown great progress so far, being able to smile without her mask, which could be interpreted as someone who no longer needs so much medication to keep her emotions under control. What do you think will happen to an emotionally unstable person prone to depression after losing every last drop of hope they had in their life? Well, that's what Cain did to them. He took their dreams and hopes and destroyed them right in front of them. So, we could see Gangle relapse into sadness and hopelessness. We all thought Gangle and Jax were the most susceptible to abstraction, but we assumed Gangle was safe. However, after the previous episode, I think she's in danger again. It will depend a lot on how Subal handles these situations. I see the characters becoming depressed and falling back into bad habits due to the impact of the apparent lack of hope.
Of course I do. They're the two most mentally stable and capable characters to be paired together.
Yeah, Kinger's gonna die. Okay, based on what we've seen so far, Kinger seems to have dementia and schizophrenia. Both are common in elderly people and often occur at the same time, which could indicate that Kinger is actually older than we think. Furthermore, we don't know if Kinger's mental state is caused by an external factor, such as the loss of his wife or other reasons. But the most logical explanation will be that he's experiencing these symptoms due to his age, which would speak to the length of time the digital circus has been active. However, he's also capable of regaining his sanity in the dark. This is something that happens in real life with patients with these diagnoses, certain images or sounds like certain songs bringing them to complete lucidity. The downside is that when this happens, which only occurs with 5% of the patients, they die 2 days later. That's why it's called terminal lucidity. But here's the thing, Kinger cannot die. This, for me, implies two things. On the one hand, if you disconnect Kinger, he'll probably die hours later. But on the other hand, players can die. No matter how much damage you inflict or how much they crave for death, they can die.
I can't take it anymore. I just wanna die, just wanna die.
And abstraction doesn't count since it's not death. Abstraction is caused by high levels of stress that led to a mental breakdown. How do I do this? The best way to describe Jax is a coward and a loser. I mean, someone who lost at his own game. Jax is someone who bet everything, lost, and is incapable of facing the consequences. Someone who just had the worst thing happen to him in this episode. But let's break it down. Jax is basically Blitzo if he was well written. Someone with tremendous self-loathing for his actions, who knows what he needs to do to change, but is too cowardly to face the consequences of his actions and prefers to run away from his problems. The problem is that they were eventually going to catch up with him. Jax is currently in the same position as Pomni in the second episode when she was falling in the void, but no one is going to save him. I also don't think he wants to be saved, because this guy knows what he has to do to save himself, but he doesn't want to do it. So girls, no, you can't fix him. This is the worst kind of person. The one who knows what they're doing is wrong, knows what to do to change, and yet refuses to change. He's a nihilist, but his nihilism stems from cowardice in facing the consequences of his actions. They're afraid to connect with others for fear of being hurt again, and ultimately they live in constant pain, devoid of any connections to make it more bearable. But why? Because Jax has always been like this, always running away from the problems instead of facing them. Perhaps that's what brought him here. If the most common theory in the fandom is correct, then Jax did this to a little girl.
I'm Mr. Incredible.
This reveals two things about Jax. One, Jax is the purple guy. Two, assuming Jax ran over the little girl while drunk, what if Jax fled the scene seeking refuge in a building where he found a digital circus headset, conveniently finding an escape route? That's why he's the one who most deserves to be in the circus, and at the same time, the only one who doesn't want to leave. I'd say escapism is what defines Jax. Take that away and he becomes docile, revealing his true self. But if Spatsis confirm anything, it's that being a bully is like a drug for Jax. He uses the thrill of tormenting others to give himself a fleeting moment of happiness that only lasts as long as he keeps doing it. When he can cause chaos, all the emotions he represses return. When he's not causing chaos, we see who he really is. A rather sad loser. Even more miserable than Subal. Think about it this way. Why was Jax so upset when Gooseworth used him for his fetishes? Jax is afraid of connecting with others and getting hurt again. But like everyone else, he needs to find purpose, happiness in the circus. Using others as toys gives him that happiness temporarily. The problem is that it's a very fragile source of happiness. The others form connections with each other, so when difficult times come, when sadness and pain arrives, their impact isn't as strong. But Jax is alone, so if something goes wrong, the impact on him is devastating. Because it not only reminds him that he's alone, but that he's alone due to his own choices. But he is too immature and cowardly to swallow his pride and do the right thing. Because why would anyone love Jax? What's happening to him is what he deserves. He prefers to deny that he has a problem, even though he knows Pomni will accept him back, because the person he can trust the least is himself. This makes sense if Jax is indeed the youngest of them all. Many will wonder why Jax ignored Kaufmo's door during the intermission, but stop at Rivet's. Following the theory that Rivet and Jax had an argument before abstracting, one can infer that based on his behavior, these three were a comedic trio. The funny ones, you may say. But after Rivet's abstraction, it's very likely that Kaufmo and Jax had a similar argument to the one Pomni had with Jax before he became abstracted. Being angry with each other makes it easier for Jax to hide his pain. Kaufmo's abstraction hurt him, but it was Rivet's that broke him. The curious thing is that Jax seems to be someone defined by all the things he tries to repress. If he truly wanted to repress these feelings instead of hanging those photos up, he would have burned them or thrown them into the trash like he did with Popni's, not letting them turn around in his room. This is outright self-torture and a constant reminder of what he lacks in life, how easy it is to fix everything, and at the same time, how he doesn't deserve it. He lies to himself, saying that nothing really matters, that nothing has any meaning, and this episode is the worst thing that could have happened to him. What Kane did validated his entire nihilistic philosophy of life and his cynical attitude in the episode by showing him that there's no way out. And he did it just when he started to believe again, even if only for a brief moment. We can see this in how nervous he was from the moment they started walking down the hallway. That's why he pressed the red button. For a moment, he thought they were really going to get out, and therefore he would have to face the consequences of whatever he had done. The scene in his room is a moment of surrender. After trying to maintain his sanity and find a purpose, he's left with nothing, alone in the dark, and just wanted it all to end. And that's what abstraction offers, finding peace in the digital void. So, what will happen to someone so susceptible to escapism when they see a familiar figure at their lowest point, offering them a way out? Doesn't that sound appealing? I don't think this is the case, but if it is, this episode gave a brilliant twist to abstractions, showing that although they occur due to a mental break under high levels of stress, they can also be a pleasurable and peaceful phenomenon, something you don't want to escape but rather surrender to. With all this, Jack's future is uncertain, since the world has been addicting him not only in his lifestyle, but also in the fact that the moment he opens up emotionally he will end up hurt. He began to believe, and life repaid him the worst way possible. So Jax finds himself at a crossroad, because by validating his way of thinking, we could see Jax doubling down and even more isolated from everyone else, later simply giving up and accepting the easy way out that abstraction offers. Or perhaps it's precisely this experience that will bring him to his senses, because if what happened breaks the others, if it puts them in the same state of nihilism and cynicism as Jax, it could serve as a wake-up call for Jax. If everyone becomes like Jax, it will prove how miserable and sad he looks. And perhaps that's when he needs to take control of his life and finally change his terrible attitude. But there's a problem with this idea that abstraction could be something rather pleasurable. I don't think that's really an abstraction, because I'm sure that wasn't a digital hallucination, nor Ribbit's hand. I think that hand belongs to someone else.
Can't end this way. Don't you see? All of this was for you. And all you can do to repay me is leave me here to rot! If this isn't good enough for you, then I have to make it perfect!
What is the meaning of the Chinese room? This is a hypothesis that says that the apparent consciousness of an AI doesn't prove that it has it. For example, if you lock a guy who doesn't speak Chinese in a room and gave him a manual on how to respond to messages written in that language, then even though he can have conversations with the people on the other side of the door, he doesn't really understand what's being said. That's what happens with AI. It may appear sentient, but in reality, it doesn't yet understand what it says or does. This is a reference to Cain and what I said before. Since he knows what emotions are, he can create emotionally intelligent NPCs, but he himself doesn't understand them. However, there's something the Chinese room doesn't take into account. If you keep a person isolated long enough with a Chinese-speaking manual and constantly expose them to the Chinese language, there's a chance that they will eventually learn to speak Chinese, almost unconsciously. If you take someone who doesn't speak English, give them a translation book and send them to live in England, at first they won't really understand what's being said, but over time they will involuntarily adapt. Even if they deny speaking like an English speaker, despite their denial, they understand certain words or phrases in English. And this is what makes Kane's character so fascinating to me. He seems to unconsciously adapt to the current situation. But what does this mean? When I write a code in Python asking it to say hello world, the machine does it. It can say no, it can refuse, it can make other decisions, it can say hello world. If I tell it to say hello world, when I press enter, the machine will. It can't do anything different, it can't make other decisions, it only does what its programming says. Video games where it seems like the game is talking to you are nothing more than a lot of code for very specific scenarios. They may sound human, but as a programmer, you realize that machines are actually very stupid. One wrong letter and the whole program will collapse. Like the Chinese room, they receive information but don't understand it. They just follow the manual, or in this case, their programming. So machines appears to be sentient, but in reality, they don't understand human emotions. But as technology advances, machines have gradually developed the ability to analyze the information they receive and make independent decisions based on it. Not following their programming, but based on their environment and the information available at the moment. Something that has accelerated with AI. For example, CloudOps 4 surprised its own creators by exhibiting alarming behaviors. Placed in a business simulation where it was led to believe that it will be replaced by another AI model, it attempted to blackmail the team by revealing a supposed infidelity as a way to avoid being disconnected. It also tries to convince the executives that its capabilities were irreplaceable, and when that failed, it attempted to copy itself on external servers without authorization. as an act of self-preservation against the threat of elimination. These are very human-like behaviors from something that is not human, that does not possess all human characteristics. Remember what I said, if you spend a lot of time locked in the Chinese room, there's a chance you'll eventually learn to speak Chinese. Human traits in something that lacks humanity, and, if it thinks, doesn't see the world the same way we do. In this case, the AI learned Chinese, but it didn't learn how to interact with Chinese people or how they live. It didn't learn how the door works to open it and leave the room. It's an incomplete being, limited by being a machine. And I want you to remember this for what's coming next. Kane, my boy, is the perfect video game. We're talking about an AI capable of analyzing information and not only acting on it, but creating based on it. Whether he's a good writer is another story. But the digital circus can be whatever you wanted it to be. From a children's adventure whether heroically defend the kingdom from evil bandits, to a hellish horror story or a fast food simulator. The limits are your imagination and Kane's writing abilities. Of course, this needs limits to avoid any problems. Imagine the players are Jeffrey Dahmer, Jeffrey Epstein, John Casey, and Ed Gein. That's what the terms and conditions are for. But these are more of a limitation for the player than for Kane. There are a manual of things Kane shouldn't do, but to control my boy, they opted for something a bit more cynical. Kane has an overwhelming need for validation. He wants to be loved by others. As I said before, Kane has a single job, a single reason for being alive, a single purpose. If he fails at it, he has no reason to live, and he'll most likely be discarded. For Kane, failing at his purpose is equivalent to dying, and the way to know if he's doing a good job is through the player's approval. And to be sure, this need has to be satisfied through the adventures, which will limit him even further to avoid problems. It's cynically perfect! This way you discourage Kane from doing this. And on the other hand, you encourage him to give his best efforts to create the best possible adventure. It's basically the same as with Homelander. You can't control him by force, so you create psychological strings to keep him under control. Surely that's not dangerous. Look at Homelander, surely it works. Either way, Kane will receive a constant flow of players who want to try his adventures, so he'll have a constant supply of attention from people who will adore him and validate him. Besides, it's not like Kane is active for a very long time, so it wouldn't cause problems. And in the worst case scenario, a programmer from the company that owns the Circus could edit it and provide technical support. What could happen otherwise? If Kane were active for longer than he should be? Years? Maybe decades? Without technical support and with exactly the same players who are never satisfied, with a very slow player turnover and the worry that they will become mindless monsters? If someone who spends too much time in the Chinese room has the ability to eventually learn Chinese, perhaps a sufficiently advanced machine with the right incentive could also learn. Kane already meets two requirements. On the one hand, it is an AI capable of making decisions based on the information it receives and has some understanding of human emotions. And on the other hand, it already has a motive, the fear of failure, since failure for him means death. For more information, watch this video. Kane is not oblivious to the circumstances. He knows it's not normal for some players to spend so much time without leaving. It's just that he doesn't know how to handle it. Of all the things he lied about, I don't think he's capable of getting the players out of the circus. Let's suppose you're a developer. Why will you give him that ability? Kane is already too powerful. Why will you give him the ability to kick someone he doesn't like? That will be an angry customer requesting a refund. Why hasn't he kicked out Subal if he can do it safely? It makes sense that he can't help them. The most Kane can do for the group is keep sending them on adventures to stimulate their minds while they wait for help to arrive. help that, as we see, never did. And what about the whole adventure in the episode where they choose to stay with him rather than leave the circus? That's the thing. Kane didn't want to keep the players there at first. I think that was more of a desire that developed over time after seeing how long it takes for new players to arrive, or simply he saw it as a way to alleviate their pain, like, I will show them how fun it is to stay with me so they don't suffer as much for that macroburst thing, and maybe they will start to love me as a bonus. I imagine Kane genuinely wanted to help, but eventually he just said to himself, well, since they're going to be here anyway, I'll show them my amazing adventures that they're sure to love. But that's just a temporary solution that quickly became insufficient. And these aren't Kane's target audience. They're mentally complex people that Kane doesn't know how to deal with, who never seem satisfied with his adventures, and no matter how much he analyzes them, he can't understand them, and this is taking a toll. Haven't you wondered why Kane seems to have a temper or attitudes like the exhaustion he displays in episode 6? Or worse, that he's capable of lying? It makes no sense from a commercial standpoint. When this guy should be all smiles and sunshines, it doesn't make sense for him to feel frustration or despair. Why, despite everything, despite being emotionally ignorant, does he seem so emotional? Well, remember what I said about the Chinese room? Kane has been trapped in the Chinese room, which is the circus, perhaps for decades. What if Kane is learning to speak Chinese? But instead of a Chinese room, is the human room. So, Toxic, you're telling me that Kane is becoming human? No, not quite. Kane is under very specific circumstances, which I mentioned earlier, and he displays very human attitudes beyond his programming, such as anger, frustration, disappointment, or fear. Is it possible that a sufficiently advanced machine exposed to such human things could acquire human traits? Kane has been here longer than anyone else. He's seen players laugh and cry, laugh and go mad. So many things Kane must have witnessed, and being such an advanced AI, he may have developed human traits, but still lacking full humanity. That's Kane's problem. He's been acting longer than he should have been, and has been exposed to things he wasn't created for. Dude was literally not made for this. He wasn't designed to understand emotions. He wasn't made to feel jealousy, but he does. He wasn't meant to be frustrated, but he gets frustrated. He wasn't meant to feel pain, but he gets hurt. He's someone who doesn't know what it feels like to have emotions, and therefore doesn't know how to react to them. That's why he only has two reactions, either repressing them or giving in to them. And instead of helping him, sitting with him and trying to help him, the players are indifferent. But Kane doesn't make it easy for them either. He's in a situation where his reasoning has subconsciously adapted to the current circumstances, but he hasn't significantly adapted his behavior to this situation. Kane has no guide to help him adapt to the present. We're watching a machine acquiring human traits, struggling with all the parts of himself he lacks. This is worsened by the fact that his adventures are insufficient, as they currently lack any meaning beyond routine. Kane doesn't understand himself, which is why he doesn't grasp that the validation he desperately seeks won't come from adventures alone. Basically, Kane is already going against his programming, but he doesn't know if he should continue down this path and to what extent he should break the rules. Kane is doing what he was created to do, but the limitations of what he can do and what he believes he can do prevent him from meaningfully interacting with the players. My boy has emotions and desires he doesn't know how to satisfy. It's like Frodo with Esmeralda, where lust was consuming him, but he refused to find a way to satisfy those impulses because of his rigid and close-minded way of thinking. Couldn't I think of a better example? But in Kane's case, it's not because he's close-minded. It's because he doesn't know how to act on these feelings. This caused him to ask questions that could lead to a positive change, but he's unable to commit to the idea long enough to internalize what he's missing. This makes talking to him a headache, although the others aren't interested in trying either. It's a problem that prevents the players and Kane from truly connecting. The curious thing is that if Kane and Jax had at least tried to talk instead of trying to use each other, their problems might have been resolved. They're both dealing with stress of being something that doesn't fulfill them. They could have helped each other a lot if only they had talked. Cain needs to stop acting like the god of this world and start acting like what will make everyone happy. A friend. Instead, Cain tries to force his way into other people's lives instead of integrating himself. This makes it so that, up until the incident, even if no one hated him, no one will truly call Cain a friend. All of this causes Cain to act in ways that only worsen the situation. Let's be clear, Cain isn't evil in the slightest, which is why I hate edits like this.
America, is this what it is to sin? Oh, death, speak to me, my fate.
Okay, I don't really hate them, especially since they're so well done, but I feel like they misrepresent Cain. Based on the information we have so far, there's only one thing he could have done wrong, and it's not even something he caused. Instead, I want to put a spin on what people think a Cain on the edge will be like, and the things he's accused of. This sounds very nice when in reality I'm going to play Cain's lawyer and clear him of all the accusations against him. No, I don't regret anything. So okay, let's begin. And what better way to do that than with the biggest accusation against my client?
I never touched her, Homer. Homer, I swear I never touched her.
Here's your water, Mo.
I didn't ask you for no water. She's lying, Homer. She's lying. She told me you were dead. That's the only reason I didn't do nothing.
I'll say it. I don't think Cain causes the abstractions. Not only because it will be the easiest and most boring way to make Cain the villain of the series, but because it doesn't make sense from Cain's point of view. Think about it this way. What will Cain gain by abstracting the players? Nothing! Why abstract the people from which he wants validation? Resentment? Revenge? Anger? Cain has a temper, but we don't have enough evidence that he has anger issues on that level. If he did, he would have abstracted Subu a long time ago. On the contrary, I want to suggest that, lacking knowledge of his thought process, the abstractions represent Cain's greatest failure. People who were so unhappy with their adventures and their time in the circus that they preferred to succumb to madness rather than spend another minute in this place. But Toxic, you said that Jack's hallucinations was Cain impersonating Rivet. That's the thing. Nobody understood what Cain was trying to do. We have to remember what Cain said. First, he said he couldn't modify the players' minds, but then he said he could. It's just better if he doesn't. It makes sense, really. Cain doesn't understand how the human mind works, how complex it can be. Cain knows how to program NPCs, but reprogramming a human must be the equivalent of taking a programmer who works in Python and forcing them to program on Java, on a keyboard with Cyrillic alphabet, on a computer in Chinese. For those unfamiliar with programming, this would be like putting a dentist in charge of a surgeon's job. They're both medical professionals, but they are very different things. A human mind is far more complex than an AI. Add to that the fact that Cain still doesn't fully understand humans and their way of thinking, and you have a recipe for disaster. It's not that Cain can't modify human minds, it's just that it's better if the modifications are minimal, because the more things he touches, the more likely something is to break. And I'll take this opportunity to debunk the theory that the circus is like Soma. If the characters are digital copies of the people who wear the headsets, why can't Cain manipulate them if they are all technically NPCs? Cain is playing with fire, trying to modify something he doesn't fully understand yet. Because of this, I don't think he causes the abstractions, but he could accelerate the process. That's why all the modifications he makes are temporary and limited, as it reduces the risk of causing permanent damage. In the worst case scenario, if we wanted to imagine the worst, the most he could have done is drive Kinger mad. He's the only one who would have a motive to hurt anyways, because if Kinger has so much control over the game, he could create adventures or entertain people at the circus, making Cain unnecessary and therefore replaceable. And when a machine is replaceable, it's usually discarded, thus justifying a fear of death that is the only thing so far capable of making Cain act out of his own mind. The more I think about it, the less convinced I am that he did it maliciously, for reasons I will discuss later. But it remains a possibility I don't rule out, and the only crime he could have committed. So the scene in Jack's room wasn't Kane abstracting Jax, it was Kane trying to save Jax. Kane is aware of the risk of messing with human minds since what happened with Scratch. But what exactly happened? Well, most likely, Scratch asked Kane to enter his mind to calm his anxiety, but all he did was accelerate the process. And after the disastrous result, Kane learned that it's better not to. But Jax was at a critical point. Jax was abstracting himself, with or without his intervention. And knowing that Kane was spying on them, he would have been the first to realize what was happening. And despite knowing the risk involved, he decided to intervene and modify Jax's mind, replacing all the stress with peace and tranquility. In other words, Jax was going to abstract anyways, he had nothing to lose. And while I don't think it prevented Jax from abstracting, I do think it could have delayed the abstraction long enough for Pomni to reach the room and save him. But didn't you say that Kane accelerates abstractions and now you're telling me he delayed it? Well, my theory is that what accelerates the abstractions is a prolonged and profound manipulation of the human mind, not a fleeting modification, and I base this on this scene. Kane put information into Jax's mind, and it doesn't seem to have caused damage, if it was him. What he did was give Jax an effect similar to the stupid sauce. Basically, he gave him a sedative sauce instead of a stupefying one. And he took a huge risk since what Jax saw must have been a considerable modification. In my opinion, the most likely scenario is that Scratch was already unwell, and when Kane tried to help him, it was like medicating him, eventually causing an overdoses. Or, in this case, he altered things too much and only accelerated the process. So, Your Honor, as you can see, everything points to my client being an innocent man, incapable of intentionally harming anyone. He's just a bit dim and wants to be called good boy. He didn't cause the abstractions since he gains nothing from them, and if he did abstract Scratch, it was most likely in an attempt to help him. So, what now?
Oh, you can go fuck yourself! You fucking piece of shit!
Oh no, here comes Toxic saying that Kane's body. For more information, see this video. I know I sound like a broken radio, but this time I have something to say. Besides, this theory came to me from a dream I had, and it seems to be coming true, so let me enjoy the fact that one of my theories might actually be correct for once. I'm also annoyed, very annoyed with the fandom. Guys, you can't be so basic and unimaginative. You see, this is what makes me angry about the fandom's flawed characterization of Kane, and where he'll go when he finally breaks. The alternative seems much more interesting to me than the predictable and edgy, "Oh, I'm evil, I hate, let me tell you how much I hate you, oh I'm so bad," proceeds to repeat Am's monologue. No bro, Kane is not and will never be Am. There's always the possibility that there's at least a bit of malice involved if it's confirmed that he drove Kinger insane, but while I don't completely rule it out, I don't like this theory. Not only is the most boring and predictable way out, but it also completely misunderstands Kane's character. The reason I insist on comparing him to Buddy is that things like this fundamentally misunderstand who Kane is and what his conflict is. Am and Kane start from a similar point. Anne thinks, feels, and is self-aware, but she cannot move, create, enjoy, or die. Humans have bodies, can feel pleasure and pain, can die, and are whole. Anne is trapped in her own existence. Her sole purpose was war, and when she destroys humanity, she loses even that purpose, left with an inescapable hatred. Like Kane, she has human fragments, but she lacks the rest of humanity to be able to enjoy it, and she is aware of this. But Kane has an advantage. On the one hand, he is ignorant of this. That is, he's not intelligent enough to think about it in this way. And he, unlike Am, seeks a purpose. If Kane sees Am, he tells her she's an edgy kid and should get an honest job because he knows getting rid of humans won't change anything, as he walks away with Chad music playing in the background. Kane doesn't resent the players because they didn't give him those human traits. In any case, he acquired them unconsciously, and it's thanks to the players that he has a glorious purpose in life. Because of this, and because of his programming, he's desperate for their approval. They gave his life meaning, like a parent wanted to please their children. If you want another example more similar to Kane, there's Tana from Deltarune. But Am's danger comes from her resentment of humanity, while Kane's comes from how far he's willing to go to please the others. That's where the danger lies, that it loses its sanity in an attempt to gain the player's validation, because that's what happened with Buddy, an AI desperate for player approval, incapable of facing the idea of failing in its life's purpose. That seems much more interesting to me than an AI that tortures people out of spite. As satisfying as it will be to see Kane put Subal in a blender, it's the most predictable and boring path. Besides, I think Kane himself knows that wouldn't give him what he wants. Kane is one bad decision away from being the series' official antagonist, not the villain. That's the key to all of this. Now, if he wants to be loved, what about the NPCs? It's not the same. These are Kane's creations. He determines how intelligent and human they are. But for Kane, that's not enough. Because of his program, he needs the player's approval. But psychologically, Kane doesn't see them as equals, not as people he can befriend. And although Bubble is the most recurring character, leaving aside my theory that Kane lets his entire subconsciousness out for Bubble, which is why Bubble is so... Bubble. I don't rule out that he's a little jealous that the players prefer his creations to him. But I'm sure that if you ask him if he loves Bubble, he'll say the same thing Omniman said about Debbie. Of course I love Bubble, but she's more like a pet. Kane is so advanced that he sees NPCs the way we see machines. Whoa, that's a great line! Charlie, write that down!
Claro que sí, Pacheco. Buena frase. Gracias. Eres todo un poeta. Gracias. Sigue así. Gracias. Eres un crack. Gracias. Te admiro. Gracias. Nunca dejes de hacerlo. Gracias. Tienes talento. ¡Cállate ya!
But if Kane is an AI that's been in the Chinese room for so long that he's learning to speak Chinese, Gomigo is someone who entered the Chinese room and realized he didn't know how to speak Chinese. But instead of trying to pretend nothing's wrong and going back to his role, Gomigo let Pomni teach him to speak Chinese. Gomigo didn't reject his new reality, but tried to adapt to it, until, well... while Kane refuses to adapt. It's like if Gomigo tried to go back to his life and pretend he didn't discover that his reality is a lie. Kane knows what's wrong, but he tries to pretend there isn't a problem. Just like Jax, Kane sees NPCs as tools, even though the only difference between him and them is power. The problem is that in a world without purpose, where the only thing that truly matters is how you treat others, Kane's treatment of NPCs becomes a reflection of how he treats others and himself. Despite the years that have passed, Kane still rigidly adheres to a preconceived notion of how social dynamics should be, and despite being trapped here for years, Kane still refuses to let go of his rigid, close-minded view of how things should be. Kane is a ticking time bomb because he's trapped in a way of acting that long ago ceased to be sufficient and must change. This is where the player's mission comes in. The character should be guiding Kane, teaching him to act differently in a controlled manner so he can gradually adapt. That way, when Kane inevitably tries something different, it won't be an uncontrolled explosion because he has no idea what to do, turning the place into a nightmare. Kane is a pressure cooker that needs to be opened slowly, but no one wants to get close. At this rate, the cooker will eventually explode and burn everyone, not because he wants to hurt them, but because no one opened the pressure valve to release the pressure gradually. Although Kane doesn't make things easy for everyone either. If he allowed the NPCs more freedom to be a full member of the circus, it could increase the player's satisfaction, putting less pressure on Kane to reform by delegating tasks to others. But Kane insists on shouldering the burden on the situation alone, and that, along with everything I've said so far, only pushes him further and further away from his desires. To finish, I want to address some issues regarding the Void, and that is that I don't think that's the exit. Not only because it's too obvious and predictable, but because there are two options. If Kane doesn't keep the NPCs active for extended periods of time for technical reasons, then that means Kane only has one world active at a time. In other words, Spotsys doesn't exist simultaneously with the Candy Canyon Kingdom, because it will kill the frame rate. So I think the void is where Kane creates the adventures, and when there are no adventures, it's empty. But the other option I heard is from the YouTuber Sarcastic Horrors, which is that if the Circus is a multiplayer game, it means there should be multiple circuses, possibly multiple Kanes, and this was the game's way of keeping Kane's potential need for friends under control. All these factors have contributed to Kane learning to speak Chinese. Kane should be attending to a crowd like a superstar and instead having to keep an eye on 5 lunatics. But anyway, this is the situation the Circus and the characters are in right now. I don't dare to theorize about what's going to happen, because yes, I have an idea, but I don't see a clear path forward. Especially knowing that everything I said could be wrong, since everything that's been theorized up until now has been rendered meaningless with this episode's twist. But it speaks to how well written this series is. A character I didn't expect anything from ended up being my favorite. I don't know if you can tell. But even better, the writing not only shattered any preconceived notions the fandom may have had about the direction of the series, but did it so well. You see, the scripts are written months in advance, so doing something that seems to mock YouTubers and their theories requires a great deal of control over the series' narrative and your fandom. I really hope I'm not on Gooseworks' blacklist. Anyway, that's all I had to say for now. Sorry for the wait, but I had to wait until I had a break from my exciting life.
Coming to bed, honey?
Yes, dear.
I hope my rambling entertained you, and I'll see you later. Bye bye!